David, this all feels like the outgrowth of an administration that has a contempt for expertise. This is just a little bit more from Noah Shachtman's op-ed. He writes, "This is an administration that actively, proudly rejects expertise. It casts those who have it as the corrupt old guard, the real enemy, the deep state, and it touts its own refusal to heed them as proof of its legitimacy and righteousness. This is an administration that makes a weekend Fox News host the leader of the world's largest military, puts a conspiracy-minded podcaster in charge of the FBI, and has at its pinnacle a reality star turned president. Blunders like this are an inevitable consequence."
Yeah, Alicia, this was essentially the theme of the confirmation hearings, right? A bunch of rookies not ready for prime time, and now 50 days later, they prove it to the world that they're not ready for prime time. I think this is a White House in crisis right now, truly a White House in crisis, because this is a scandal that is easily understood by the American people. You had 18 of our top national security leaders in the country who were using an unsecure, though, there's some security to signal, but basically certainly an unclassified platform to share classified information. And in this case, actual war plans. This was at the very top of our national security apparatus. This is a White House in crisis. And I think historically, the solution, the answer would be for the White House to assure the American people that they've made corrections and that everything is okay. That's not this environment. This environment, though, is the White House. They do have to assure Republicans, the Senate Republicans who walked the plank on Hegseth and others and said, we're OK with this pick. Those Senate Republicans are the ones who now know the White House has to do something. Truly, somebody has to get fired in this environment. And they are looking at it through a political lens, not a national security lens. They should be, right? The grave injury to the nation here is a national security injury, the compromising of national security. But for Republicans, they just need to solve a political crisis. And that probably does include terminating somebody. I know Donald Trump doesn't want to listen even to Republicans in his ear, but this has to move towards a termination, because that largely ends the news cycle for Republicans and they can move on. I'll go one step deeper. This is a true conversation with a Trump insider today. The answer that some Republicans are saying is you remove Hegseth and you replace him with Ron DeSantis. It actually solves two immediate needs for the White House. How do you get the DeSantis movement out of their interest in Byron Donalds in Florida and also solve the Hegseth crisis? That is something that is actually being talked about among Trump insiders right now.
Peter Baker, lots to pick up on there. One, does this White House know that it is in crisis? Are they entertaining the possibility that someone does, in fact, need to be terminated? Have you heard Ron DeSantis' name floated anywhere in that mix?
Well, Dave Jolly obviously has great sources, and I will, defer to his reporting on this. I have not heard that myself, but it's certainly an intriguing possibility. And I think that it goes to Trump's sort of very, ephemeral relationship with the people around him, right? There have been whispers about, for instance, Mike Waltz going back quite a while now. Is he too establishment for the MAGA crowd? There's been some undermining of him among some of the president's people and allies. So it's possible that, for instance, if he decides he wants to, make a sacrifice, if you will, to make the story go away, that if he already has some doubts about Mike Waltz, that might be something we might see. So far, they're not showing that hand, and so far he doesn't want to acknowledge that possibility. But with this president, obviously anything is possible, and I think that if Hegseth were in fact pushed out, that would solve maybe a problem for him, as Dave Jolly just said. On the other hand, it would be an admission, or it'd be seen as an admission, that he made the wrong choice in the first place, which is something I think he's very loath to do.
Director Brennan, and there's a series of possibilities here. We've talked about the possibility of a resignation, the possibility of a termination, what it would look like to have a limited IG investigation. You have one Republican in the U.S. Senate saying that this needs to be investigated. For our allies, what are they going to need to see and hear to feel some assurance that U.S. national security is back on track?
Well, I think they have to hear from probably Donald Trump that he has decided and directed that Signal not be used for any of these types of discussions at the principals level, at the W's level, at any level, that it is not a secure system. So that, number one, as a way to reassure our allies and partners. Number two, I do think that there needs to be some type of accountability here. The ones that I see as most culpable certainly are Mike Waltz, because he is the chair of the Principals Committee meeting. And this was a Principals Committee meeting. He is the one that put together this group. It says it right in the chat there. He put together the agenda. He's the one basically that authorized this forum to be used as for discussion. And the other person, obviously, is Pete Hegseth. He's the one that put this great detail about a military operation into this chat. Those are the two. The other ones, J.D. Vance said disparaging things about Europe. I mean, he should be embarrassed, but I don't think he feels any shame about these things. But the other participants, they basically were told this is an authorized channel for at least a coordination or discussion on this. Maybe they never thought that there would be this type of detail that would get into classified information. But again, I think it's Hegseth and Waltz, the ones that really, Donald Trump has to look at and say, okay, you are going to be held accountable for this. And that is, I think, going to reassure our allies that there's going to be a tightening up of the procedures and protocols that the White House is going to be using in the future.
Director Brennan, forgive me for this question, because I am a very rules-based person. You give me a rule, I will follow it. So when you say what would need to happen is the President of the United States would need to issue a declaration saying we are no longer using Signal, how do you guarantee and how do you audit whether or not that direction is even being followed? It already exists. You weren't supposed to do this. They weren't supposed to do this in the first place, and yet here we are.
Well, obviously, this new administration had decided that it was okay to do it. So there was not a rule against it. They decided on their own to do it. But you're right. I mean, there is no guarantees, especially in a White House that is led by a Donald Trump, where there is a fair amount of deceit, dishonesty. And so I think there's going to be lingering questions, irrespective of what type of mitigating steps might be taken afterward. And this is where it really is going to come down to the professionals who are in the institutions, the agencies and departments that provide the security every day for our intelligence that we collect ourselves and that we get from our foreign adversaries. But I think there's a great doubt on the part of many, including overseas, that there's really going to be a change in terms of this administration's handling classified information. And unfortunately, as you pointed out in that New York Times piece, I think our foreign adversaries, the Chinese and the Russians, Iranians and others, really see this as a real field day for them in terms of how they're going to take advantage of not just this and the use of these unsecure systems, but also with Elon Musk's Doge army going into the U.S. government and dismantling it and accessing networks. I mean, it is a field day. It's a counterintelligence nightmare for those within the U.S. government who still take counterintelligence seriously.